Hello and welcome once again to the academyofworship.org YouTube channel. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be talking about something really important, but kind of hard to do a video for. So the format's going to be a little bit different. I've been asked some version of, how do I cover all the parts in a song when we're a relatively small team, or we've only got one instrument of this certain kind? And that can be a really tough question to answer. And today I'm going to attempt to shed some light on that, at least a little bit, so that those participating in the team, whether it's a volunteer playing an instrument, or maybe the band leader or worship leader, everyone can be on the same page. So with all that said, let's get to it. Check it out. So here we are in presentation mode. This topic was a little bit different than normal, and so instead of demoing something on an instrument like a guitar, I figured we'd just sit here and chat a little bit. I know that's not exactly what everyone wants in a video, but just bear with me because I think this is going to be an important thing to talk about. So we have a small team, and how do we cover all of the parts needed? Because not everyone has 2 or 3 guitar players, a couple of synth players, a whole bunch of singers, and a drummer, and a bass player, and just these gigantic teams. The question is, I hear how the produced track sounds from the professional team that we're playing the cover of or whatever, and we want to sound like that, but we have like 4 people in our band. How do we do that? And so I'm going to attempt to kind of get into that a little bit today. It may not be perfect, but it'll at least get you going, and I think a lot of people struggle with this. A lot of teams struggle with this, so let's do it. So, of course, being on a worship team has its challenges. I'm not going to, of course, cover every single one of them here. But, of course, being on a team where everyone's time is limited and we can't focus 100% of our energy on all the things that we'd love to do musically, we'd run into this. So one of the first things we run into is learning new songs on short notice. I don't know about everyone's situation, but most teams only get a couple of days up to maybe a week to learn new material. And for some people, that may be really rough because you're not used to learning the new material, or you don't have time because everyone's working jobs and has a family. So of course, right out of the gate, we're going to have a problem with people having enough time to dedicate to this. Of course, when we listen to these great teams and stuff and worship teams that do these modern productions, they're complex. It's not like there's one guitar playing one part, a keyboard player, bass player, drummer, and you're done. It's multiple instruments, lots of overdubs, lots of things that you couldn't physically reproduce on stage without either using tracks, extra things pre-recorded. And not only that, the productions are dense and complex, and so you have the songs that are hard to pick certain things out of because you have multiple guitar layers and things like that. So it's tough. You run into these issues where it's hard to figure out what to play. On top of that, as a musician, you may just not even have the gear needed to reproduce a certain tone or sound, so you're not going to get the exact sound due to just that fact alone. And of course, the skills of everyone on a team range. Every musician's different. Every musician has been playing for a different amount of time. And of course, everyone has different time to dedicate to these things or understanding of music. So there's a plethora of things between musicians that can differ. And of course, one of the main problems we run into is just expectations aren't set properly. And I'm not going to get into this. I think this is a whole video unto itself that we can talk about on a worship team. But an expectation on the team can be set very differently among different musicians or different team members. You may have a leader that expects one thing and a person who has an understanding of another. So it's really important that expectations are set properly and everyone talks about it. So yeah, there's a synopsis of some of the challenges we face on worship teams, and all of these tie into how we learn music or how we hear music. So keep all these in mind as we move forward. So as a musician, you're listening to a song, and it doesn't matter what instrument you're playing. If you don't actually have the sheet music in front of you and you're tasked with learning, say, a complex guitar part or even a keyboard part without sheet music, and all you have is lead sheets like chords above words, that can be rough. So the song you're needing to learn, you're listening to, it has a whole bunch of dominant parts. There's one of you to do it. Now what? Well, the first thing to do is to make sure that you're listening to whatever piece of music as a listener and not a musician first. Make sure that when you listen to it, you're taking notes. So don't have your keyboard or your guitar or your bass or whatever in front of you, and just listen. Put on some headphones, go into a quiet place, and just listen to the song. What you're listening for is the stuff that pops out of the music. What parts are important? What parts aren't? Take note of that. If you notice that there's a whole bunch of guitar parts, well, what parts need to be there and what parts don't? So when the listeners hear, whether it's a congregation or an audience or whatever, when they hear you playing the parts, the recognizable things that they would expect are there. And it may not be every single part, but that's okay. The fact of the matter is you're not going to be able to cram every note, every phrase, every part into a song that the production has. It's just not possible unless you have that many people on the platform or stage. So for instance, if you're listening to a piece of music and you're a guitar player, and this goes for anyone honestly, but particularly pertains to guitar players, is that if you notice that in one section there's a rhythm part that's more prominent than, say, maybe a tiny lead line or some one-note line that's behind the stuff, then you should pay attention to learning that rhythm part over that other lead line. It's not bad to learn the other lead line, but people are going to probably expect the rhythm part. And you'll notice maybe in rehearsal that if you try one part over the other, it sounds empty and needs the other part. So err on the side of caution, as it were. Just make sure to play the part that sounds better, but it's also the part that people expect if you can do both. And of course, in another section, if a lead is really popping out and has to be there, or there's an interlude where there's a very specific part, do that. It's okay to learn both, but obviously it's impossible to do everything all at once. Here's a good one for anyone out there. If you don't have the specific instrument that's needed for a part to be in the music, learn it. It doesn't matter if it's a keyboard part and you're a guitar player, learn the keyboard part on guitar, because people are going to expect to hear that line. Now, it may not be perfect, and it may not be the right tone, but at least it's there filling in. But if you're a keyboard player and you have no guitar player, but there's a part that needs to be there, find something that's really close as a sound, play the part, and just get it in there because it's important. People expect it. So learn it. Now, switching gears, I want to talk to the band leaders and worship leaders freaking out because what they hear in their inner mix or their monitor mix doesn't sound like the full production. Now, most experienced worship leaders or experienced band leaders know you're never going to get the full perfect production unless you have pre-recorded tracks you're playing with and can let things slide. A lot of the newer generation of band and worship leaders might be struggling with this, so it's important that we cover it. So I'm talking to you. Have grace. It's important that as a leader, you're not making anyone feel unaccepted or that they can't do something. So you're going to have to just let certain things go. That's just the way it goes. Part of being a leader is having grace and letting things go where they need to go. Pick the battles you want to fight and only fight those. It's not worth fighting every little battle and dying on every little hill. Here's another big one for leaders. You want to encourage those that struggle. There's going to be people you work with on whatever instrument or whatever position that are going to struggle with certain parts or even learning a part. And you're going to have to encourage them, even when it doesn't feel like you want to encourage them. So please do. Always step up and let them know that they're doing a great job in trying. And keep in mind that you don't actually have to sound like the recording. It's okay. In fact, some of the best versions of songs I've heard are people doing a cover or someone doing something where they didn't have all the same instrumentation. And a lot of times it's more enjoyable. And in the context of worship, sometimes not sounding like a whole big production in a church that doesn't need that is what you need to do. You need to connect and lead people in worship. You don't need to be a big, polished, huge recording sounding band. And sometimes good enough is just fine. You got to draw a line as a leader and just say, look, our job here is to lead worship, or our job is to entertain, whatever your venue is, and this is what we're doing. So just let it go and work with what you have. Highlight the positive. A lot of times after a performance or after leading worship or whatever, you're going to have like a debrief section or a debrief time. And you want to use that to make sure to highlight with individual people the parts that were good and encourage that. There's been times under my leadership where I've been able to highlight something positive in someone's playing that wasn't necessarily the entirety of their playing. For instance, maybe the tone wasn't right on the instrument, but I liked one of the effects they used and how they used it. So it was great. It's like, hey, that delay sounded fantastic. That you keep doing that. I love that. So that encourages them to know what sounds good and what doesn't. If they do ask you point blank, hey, what didn't sound good, with some grace and some couth, just let them know what it was that could be improved and move on. You don't need to spend a lot of time on the negative. In fact, negative rarely ever helps unless it's something you're learning from specifically. So just keep it positive and highlight the positive stuff. And I guarantee you that over time, things will get better. And you'll notice that the things you like will become more prominent and the things you don't like will just kind of get ignored. So that's pretty much it. I know I didn't cover every single possible thing that could come up when it comes to, hey, how do I cover all the parts? But I think we covered how you can listen and how you can approach when you're listening to something that you know you won't be able to reproduce perfectly live. And that's okay. I think that's the takeaway here. It's okay to not be able to do it perfect, but to highlight the positive and make sure that you're trying for the parts that people are going to hear. I think that's the main thing I've ever told people under my leadership is if you listen to a song, it's okay not to play every part, but I do need the parts that you expect to hear. So if it's a specific lead line or if there's a keyboard sound or something and it's a very prominent thing, let's try and get that part. And you know what? Sometimes you're just not going to get it. It's all right. No worries, no harm, no foul. Just move on and keep on plugging along. Please subscribe, like, and share. Head over to academyofworship.org for your free gift, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.